This is season 3 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. I'm your host, Kathleen Dames, and over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit basic cable together. An awesome worsted weight cabled pullover. Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 12. 12, woo! Who needs to hold up fingers for numbers when you can just say it's the finale? I should have like a glitter cannon and bottles of champagne or sparkling apple juice or whatever is your preferred tipple, and it's a party. So yay, we're finished. I've finished my sweater. As you can see, I am wearing premium cable. I love it. The Zalti is such a lovely yarn. It just has this really wonderful presence, and I love the colors. I love the stripes, and it wasn't exactly in the original plan to switch up the stripe sequence in the yoke, but that is what I ended up doing because I went with the solid pocket and the cuffs and hem. I started to realize after I joined everything together that I wasn't going to have quite enough of the lovely Scrimshaw yarn. So that led me to change the stripe sequence in the yoke. And then I realized as I was doing the saddle shoulder shaping that it would be a lot easier to do it in just one color. So this sort of fade out in the yoke, it wasn't in the original plan, but I love it. I think it makes it really special and unique, and you get a lot of cool stuff going on in this sweater. So how is your sweater? How is your basic cable, whether you did it straight up like the pattern or whether you added your own choices? I hope it's going well. If you finished, congratulations. Throw yourself a party. Find a glitter cannon, and if you find one, please let me know where to get one. And I thought I would just sort of remind everyone of what we have accomplished over these 12 episodes this season. We went from just a basic idea to a finished sweater. We learned about reading patterns, getting all that information from the materials section and the schematic to help us decide what size, how much yarn we needed, what kind of changes we might want to make it a sweater that fits us perfectly. If you have broader shoulders or shallower shoulders or bigger arms and a smaller bust, there are so many different ways you can customize any sweater pattern. Jane's getting a little close here. Her wheels are on a slant. I hope that the things you learned here you can take to your next sweater, whether it's a pattern of mine or somebody else's pattern, because generally when we write knitting patterns, we don't have an exact system that everybody follows, but we all sort of play in the same sandbox. You need to know how your materials and what size needle that was used by the knitter to get the garment in question. But that's just the starting point, and that's where our talks about gauge come in, where every knitter is different and you start to get to know your knitting gauge in your chosen yarns with your chosen needles. And remember that the yarn and the needle surface and you and how you're feeling all go into creating that gauge. So if you got gauge with a yarn and a needle 3 years ago, it may not be the same. You may be feeling different things now. You may have changed your style of knitting, and whatever your gauge is now is what you need to focus on. And the great way to check your gauge, we talked about in the gauge episode, is to knit a sleeve. And if you knit a sleeve, you are that much closer to having a finished sweater, and you also get a lot of great information out of that sleeve. Now, one of the questions that came up with basic cable, because the sleeves are just plain old stockinette, is if we have the same stockinette gauge, will we have the same gauge in the cables? And the answer is a sort of qualified yes. If you are making stitches in the same proportion that I am, we can all play together, and your cables should be approximately the same. Now, of course, every knitter is different, so the way you form your cables may be slightly different, but I think that's all okay. I think if you know that you're getting the same stockinette gauge in the sleeve, we're good to go. And so not only are you good to go, you've double checked, and you also are down one sleeve. Or if you're like some of the knitters I know on Instagram who have been working on their sweaters recently, they've done their sleeves 2 at a time. Now, for whatever reason, I have not mastered that technique. So maybe that's something that I'm going to work on this year. I haven't decided yet, but it is a great technique if you really know that you're going to get gauge and that you want to be that much closer to finishing your sweater. I think the thing I like about knitting one sleeve at a time is it goes pretty quickly, and I get all that information. And then either I'll knit the second sleeve, but usually then I'll go on to the body because I really want to get to the fun part. Usually bodies have more going on, whether it's here in premium cable, I did do one cable on the sleeve, and I think that's really pretty, and it goes up onto the saddle shoulder here. But the body has all these other cables, and then we have this pocket action. So I just like to get to the body because that's sort of fun. And then I can go back and bang out another sleeve fairly quickly, and then get to the real excitement for me, which is the yoke, where through a bunch of different shaping techniques, we turn a bunch of tubes into an actual sweater that fits your body. And the great thing about working bottom up is that if you discover that your sweater is just too short and you can't deal with it, and it's not short enough to be cropped and cute, or you're not up for cropped, which is totally fine, but it isn't that much, you're not going to have to take out that much knitting if you have to take out the yoke to add more length to either the sleeves or the body. And then you get to knit the yoke over again. And I also find that yokes are where so much of the fit makes a difference. So you may find that it's just too deep and it's ending up with everything hanging down too long. You now know that, and you can go back and adjust your decrease rates and make a shorter yoked sweater if you need to. What else did we learn? We learned, I hope you did, how to cable without a cable needle. It is hands down one of my most favorite techniques. It makes everything go so much faster, and you don't have to worry about losing your cable needle in the dark or wherever. It just, as I think I said in that episode, there have been only, I think, 2 cables in all of my cable knitting experience that I have found that I needed a cable needle. And actually I ended up using just a spare DPN. But those are the only times where I really felt like I needed the stitches to be on a separate third component. And so if you are cabling without any cable needle, it's going even faster. It's so great. And it's so much fun. One of the things I didn't talk about in that episode is doing the kinds of cables where you switch between knits and purls. And that's something that I'm going to do going forward. I'm going to do a video for you for the current Erin for Frederick knit along. So that has some cables where we switch positions. And so I'm going to do that in a couple weeks for you because this cable, it's just it's a 3/3, and here on this one as well, a 3/3 cross where you're crossing knits over knits. But sometimes you want to move stitches over the purl fabric, and it's basically the same. There's one little extra thing that you have to keep in mind that that may not be obvious if you've never done it before, but I promise we'll get to that in a couple weeks. If you haven't joined the Erin for Frederick knit along and you're interested, having accomplished this sweater, please come join us on the Ravelry forum. There'll be links to that in the show notes. And that's a knit along that's going through March. It's the first quarter of the year. Big exciting time if you're ready to start knitting a sweater for yourself or a loved one and ready for new challenges. And Erin for Frederick has a lot of different cable stitches and an exciting hybrid yoke construction. In fact, here we go. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, this is an Erin for Frederick. I'm just going to drape it on Jane here. That's going to slide off, so hold on. All right, Jane, we're going to change it up for you. So an Erin for Frederick, inspired by Captain Frederick in Jane Austen's Persuasion, and first published in Jane Austen Knits, is this great hybrid yoke unisex pullover. It's got a simple rolled collar. You start right away on the cables. There's no ribbing, although some folks have done ribbing or garter stitch edges, but I really wanted that modern look of diving right into the cables. But you can see that the cables are knits traveling over pearls, beautiful cables, this hybrid yoke construction that has that sort of saddle shoulder thing going on, and then a saddle coming up the center back here that has room for more of this beautiful cable work. So if you like, come join us for that. If you don't, that's great. Keep working on your basic cable, or pretty soon premium cable will be ready for you. I will send you an email when it is available in my Ravelry shop. I'm just waiting for a few last things, and then I'll be able to publish it. In the meantime, you can see that I changed basic cable into premium cable. I did striping, 1 row stripes through the body, and 2x1, is it 2x1? No, it's 3x1 stripes in the yoke, and with contrasting collar, cuffs, and hem, and a kangaroo pocket that you work as you go. I also added waist shaping, I added a cable on the sleeve, and I changed the yoke from a raglan to a saddle shoulder. Those are all things you can do in your own basic cable. And there are plenty of other options too. I gave you a bunch of suggestions in the choices episode, so you can refer back to that. And those are things that you can do to any sweater to make it your own. You can say, oh, I like that sweater, I like the cable design, or I like the way the collar is done, but I really wish it had waist shaping. Well, you can add waist shaping to just about any sweater. There are a few things you need to keep in mind. You need space to do it, or do it between elements that are already in the sweater, or shift those elements a little. But there's always room for waist shaping. There is always the opportunity to use multiple colors, to do stripes, or to just do one color. If you're using a hand-dyed yarn, it's good to swap the skeins every round anyway. So you can still do 1 row stripes, but just of the same yarn, and that will help blend the colors even more. You'll be able to see that on basic cable, which we'll put back on Jane. Jane is just changing outfits left and right. So in the live show, I answered a bunch of your questions, even though I couldn't, had a little trouble with the technology. Luckily, you had sent in questions in advance, and those were super helpful. And I hope that the questions that I answered, that all those questions and answers were helpful to you, even if you didn't ask it. And of course, remember that anytime you have a question, you can reach out to me in the Ravelry forum. I'm also planning for a while I take a break from the sweater and work on some other stuff, I'm planning to do a monthly live show. I will send you information about that in the newsletter as well. So if you're watching this and you haven't signed up for the newsletter, be sure to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater and sign up at the bottom of the page for the newsletter. And then you will get all sorts of information about the sweater, upcoming live shows, the release of premium cable, all that good stuff. So what else did we learn here? You knitted body, you knitted 2 sleeves, you brought them together into the yoke, you mastered cable knitting, you did the yoke, you bound off, and you did all your finishing work. We talked about Kitchener stitch, weaving in ends. We didn't do the more complicated end weaving that looks like Swiss darning that we did in the Pearly Pullover, but you certainly can do that if you like. Of course, you are the boss of your knitting, and whichever techniques really work for you are the techniques you should go for. So if you are back knitting the solstice cardie and you are like, I don't want to knit my sleeves flat and then seam them up, you can knit them in the round. You can, you are the boss. The gauge may be slightly different, but probably not enough to be noticed. There's something called the galloping horse test, and I think it's a great thing to keep in mind when you're getting hyper perfectionistic about when you're becoming a hyper perfectionist about your knitting. Will you notice as you gallop by on a horse if you don't fix that thing? If you won't notice, then you can probably let it go. At the same time, if it's really, really going to bother you, go back and fix it now. Stop, go back and fix it, because it's supposed to make you happy. You're not going to want to wear a sweater that every time you look down at it, you're like, oh, I miscrossed that cable. Now, other people might look at that miscrossed cable and think, oh, that shows that it's handmade. It shows that it wasn't made by a machine. So again, you are the boss of your knitting. If that feels right to you, to have that handmade quality, that error that probably nobody else will notice but you can leave it in. But if it's really going to bother you, go back and fix it. I think I showed you how to fix a miscrossed cable in the cabling episode. You can drop those stitches down, use some DPNs, work them back up in the proper order. And then once you block it, you won't notice any of those errors. And of course, then we did, after the finishing, we did blocking. This time I showed you how to block in a machine. I definitely use washing machine when I block multiple sweaters. I find it's more challenging for my machine. It's a top loader with a center, dasher spinny thing. It tends to get unbalanced if there's only one sweater in there. So I either throw in some towels, or I usually wash my sweaters in bunches. I color coordinate them, so the pinks and the purples might go in one load. And I say load, but I don't really mean load, of course. I don't let it go through the whole thing. Mostly I'm using the tub to soak, and I do a tiny, tiny bit, like 20 seconds of agitation at any one time. And then I use the machine's spinning function to get out more of the yarn. Now that is faster and more efficient than rolling your sweater up like a sausage and stomping on it. But the stomping is a lot of fun. So the other thing, of course, with blocking is leaving your things alone to dry. Leave them alone. Remember, I told you, leave them alone. Just overnight. That's really just the best thing. It allows the stitches to settle and dry, get all the moisture out of there, get everything locked into position, and then you're ready to wear your sweater. Just like I am today. I am so happy to be wearing mine. I'm loving the pocket. And of course, I've been wearing my basic cable a lot too this winter. So I'm really excited that I have two sweaters for the price of one. Not really, two sweaters. But one that I knit beforehand and one that I was able to knit with you. So thank you so much for being here, for knitting along with me, or just watching later. I hope that I have provided a lot of fun, helpful tips and tricks for you to make any sweater that you knit a success. Remember, if you ever have questions, feel free to ask me in the Ravelry forums. Link will be in the show notes. And if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, be sure to do that. So thank you so much for being here. Best of luck with your sweater. Be sure to come share it in the Ravelry forums, or share it on Instagram. The hashtag KD Sweater Basic Cable. Of course, this will be hashtag Premium Cable. Be sure to share it with me. Tag me in the photo, and I'd love to see it and share it with other knitters. So thank you so much for being here. Until next time, happy knitting. Mwah. Bye. This is season 3 of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Over the course of our 12-week season, we will knit basic cable together. Many thanks to Jen at Spirit Trail Fiberworks, Corinna at Picnic Knits, Tara Swiger and my fellow Starship Captains, and you for being part of The Sweater with Kathleen Dames. Don't forget to visit KathleenDames.com/thesweater to sign up for the newsletter. Just not a joiner? Purchase your copy of Basic Cable from my Ravelry shop anytime. Be sure to share your progress on social media with the hashtags Basic Cable and KD Sweater. Questions? Comments? Visit the Kathleen Dames Design Ravelry forum today. Thanks so much for joining me, and happy knitting.